G'day everybody and welcome back to another episode of the Ask Tom Tech Show. My name is Tom Freer and today I wanted to talk to you all about Teams and SharePoint within the Office 365 suite. So Microsoft Teams is a relatively new product within the Office 365 suite, and it's a sensational tool to be able to collaborate with your team, chat, video conference. We can also do voice and telephony and those sort of things through it. It is the replacement for the older Skype for Business service, which some may be familiar with. But what it also introduces is the element of actual creating teams within that, so you can have your colleagues within that group to communicate with directly and to then start sharing data and bringing data, making it more visible to them. Now, what we need to take into consideration is that this is a collaboration platform, and that's what it's primarily designed for. It's primarily designed to, let's say, take away the noise out of your email and bring those conversations into a single view that you can then go through and see and talk about what's happening. As an example, with a document, so you would post a document within your Teams instead of sending that attachment out to everybody. That document lives within the team. People can edit the document. You can have multiple people editing the same document. You can converse and have conversations about the document. You can then invite people into a meeting to have a video conference meeting with that, or a voice meeting across it, to start discussing it. So it's a really cool collaboration platform. Now, what we've seen in a couple of instances with some organisations is that they've gone all in on Teams, which is fantastic, and they're starting to deploy that and roll it out across the board. But what they're trying to do in there is to make it a one-stop shop for all your data and content for the entire organisation. And to be honest, that's not where it fits. Your teams should be set up as teams. So consider it business units, consider it project teams, those type of things, where you have a defined number of people who are working collaboratively or have the ability to work collaboratively in that environment. A team would typically be not the entire organisation. Now the reason being is that it can get quite noisy in there with lots of communication and lots of chat. You'll end up having the same issues that you have with email, where you start getting CC'd or copied on every email that's going around. You just got this massive amount of noise and data that's not applicable to what you need to do. So this is where Teams comes in really well, is that you build those teams specifically around what you're actually working on. They're working teams. So we, as an example, you would use, so we have our service team, we have our project team, we have our sales and marketing team. Now these are areas within Microsoft Teams that people are members of, and not everyone is a member of every team. Some are across them, but it means that we can have conversations, we can have discussions, we can put content that's relevant to that group that they can work on and track and manage and converse about, which is really good and really powerful. So Teams will start to bring together other aspects, it does bring together other aspects of your Microsoft suite, such as Microsoft Planner, OneNote. We can then link to document libraries on SharePoint and things like that. So for that group of people, that team, we can start bringing in all these different features and functions that are really going to make them a lot more productive within their environment. Now, as I mentioned before, we're seeing some people try and put everything into Teams, and it's just not designed for that. It's really about, as I say, it's about those working teams. So don't discount what else you have in the Microsoft Office suite on how that needs to play a part in your overall strategy around it. And I specifically talk about Microsoft SharePoint in this instance, because there is some confusion around where SharePoint sits versus Teams. The fact is, Microsoft Teams is essentially built on a SharePoint backend. And people think that of, okay, well then I get all the features and functions of SharePoint within my team. And yes, you do, but it's not at a level that can be surfaced out easily to your entire organization. So this is where we think, and I believe, that SharePoint still plays a really critical part in your overall strategy and communication and collaboration strategy for your business. Think of SharePoint as the ability to share data with everybody in the organization. Share information, share data, share files, share lists, share content with your entire organization. Think of Teams as sharing that data within your immediate team that you're working with, be it your sales and marketing team, your tech team, your project team for a particular project. You're not going to want to have things like your company policies and procedures surfaced in a common team, because it will get very, very noisy very, very quickly, and people will start to disengage with it. And that's not what we want. We want people to be more engaged with that Teams environment. And this is where SharePoint sits in. And SharePoint needs to be considered as part of your overall strategy. You don't have to deploy it first thing and get it running. You can start with Teams, and this is where we do start a lot in just getting Teams and getting people comfortable with that new collaboration approach. But take SharePoint as your the repository for data and information that you want to share with your entire organization, or more than just a specific group of people. So we look at SharePoint as that starting point, that intranet, where you can start surfacing information across the entire organization. We can have announcements, we can have events, we can all these sorts of things. And those are the type of things that we want to see in SharePoint. It's a place where people will go to get the information. They're not necessarily going to be notified about it, and that's probably a key element there. But also with SharePoint, you'll notice that you're going to have overlap in the type and design around that. And what I mean by that is you will typically have a SharePoint site being your intranet, your main page. You will then have your sub-sites that sit below that, which will normally reflect and resemble your organizational structure. So again, think of operations, sales, marketing, admin, finance, whatever your business structure looks like. Your SharePoint will typically replicate that. Now this is we can have everyone seeing the intranet, we can have everyone seeing certain sections, but we may only want certain people to see finance, and that's fine. This is the final resting place for all your data and those sort of things. But what we'll see is potentially crossover between the two, where you might have a finance team and a finance SharePoint site. They may or may not be the same back-end site, but they're there. They're there to be, and you will have those different environments, and they're used for different functions. So the SharePoint, let's take a great example around managing marketing material. So you would have a marketing information. So you have brochures, you'll have checklists, content, branding, logos, all that sort of stuff. And you might want to make that available to the entire business, which is what you want. So you want people getting the right logo, you want them getting the right color charts, you want them getting the latest brochures and all those sort of things that they so your team, your greater team, your business can be sharing that out as needed and using that collateral. But you don't necessarily want them seeing all the conversation that goes around getting to that point. That's what your marketing or your sales team will be developing, the feedback, the chat, the questions, the updates, all this sort of stuff. The rest of your business doesn't necessarily want to see that. So you would retain that working data within Teams, and then you would publish your final data within SharePoint that can be surfaced out across the business. And that's where we start to see it. We start to see it play out. And it's important you think about these things as you go, because there are limitations within Teams about you can have 500,000 teams within there, so there's no limitation on that. But what you'll find, if you start building everything within Teams, the limitation is going to be people wanting to use that and wanting to see it, because they're going to get overwhelmed again by the noise that will come out of it if they're seeing everything across the business, and that's not what you want. You want it to be very, very focused on the working teams, the working environments. You will spin up teams, you will take teams down. Teams is a very dynamic environment. You've got a new project for a client, you spin up a new team, you invite the people into that team, you might invite the client into that team so they can collaborate on that project as it goes. That project is completed, you then archive the team, but prior to that you would move your final data into a client repository that sits on SharePoint as an example, and that's where we see it. So all that final data that as a business you want to see, you want to retain, you want to be able to find, will sit in SharePoint. As a working group, it will sit in Teams. And that's pretty important for you to take into consideration when you're mapping that out. Teams is not a replacement for SharePoint, and I think that's really important. And SharePoint is not a replacement for Teams in that sense. Yes, they are both the same back-end platform, and there are ways to connect and move that information around, which is what you want. But you need to think of them as they're going to deliver different outcomes for your business. So you need to define that and understand what that is. But by all means, start using Microsoft Teams, because it is a fantastic little tool. And when I say little, it's actually quite a big tool now, and what you can do with it. And the scope of where it's being developed is fantastic. We can create lots of automation and bots, and we can surface information from your SharePoint into that team that's relevant. And vice versa, we'll then be pushing data up to the team into SharePoint, so the rest of the business can see what's going on. So again, just as a sort of a wrap up on that, let's look at when you're considering what you can do within the Office 365 suite and you're looking at Teams, don't think of Teams as your only deliverable in that. Don't use Teams as all of company communication. There might be reasons and times to do that, but ultimately I think you're going to get more value by keeping Teams focused on your teams, so they can collaborate more effectively as a working group, and then have SharePoint sit over the top of that as your organizational-wide structure, your organizational-wide information portal, all the final resting data. So SharePoint will become your final file server in that sense. It will have your top-level lists of clients or partners or whatever it is, and that's where you'll start to build the data out. And that's where it sits today. Over time, that's obviously going to change and develop as Microsoft invest more in Teams, but there's still a massive amount of development and a massive amount of investment in SharePoint as a platform. It's not going anywhere, and it's used in a different way within your environment. So yeah, so keep in mind Teams for your working teams, your working groups, SharePoint to share data with everyone in your business. And that's a really good way to look at it. So we'd love to hear more, and we'll be talking more about the different elements of Office 365 and the technical components in there throughout this year. Excellent.